Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. So last weekend we have 3 movies that were released in theaters, the white ones, and they are Angel Has Fallen. That is the latest Fallen movie in the franchise. I mean, I believe it's the 3rd one. And then we have the feel-good, uplifting movie Overcomer, a sort of a faith-based film. And then the dark comedy Ready or Not. Let's see how those movies did at the box office. Alright, let's get started. So coming in at number 1 is the latest Fallen movie, Angel Has Fallen. This is the 3rd movie in the franchise, and it is about the guardian angel played by Gerard Butler, right? He guarded the president, played by who played the president? Morgan Freeman. So Gerard Butler plays this, I think, FBI, protector, bodyguard to the president, played by Morgan Freeman, and they got separated during an attack, a sneak attack. Or you've seen the trailer while the president was out in some lake fishing. So and then he was framed for the attack, and he is on the run from his forces. So he teams up with his father. Gerard Butler's character teams up with his father to clear his name and, of course, to rescue the president from the forces attacking him. So that is Angel Has Fallen, right? Latest in this series. I said that this is the 3rd movie. We saw a decline at the box office take, at least domestically. With the 2nd movie, London Has Fallen, right? The first movie of Olympus Has Fallen opened to about 30 million. Right, then the 2nd movie opened to about 21.6 million. So I said, judging by the trend, it's going to drop. But we're getting these movies, the sequels, because it did so well overseas, right? The first movie did 170 million worldwide. The 2nd movie did 205 million worldwide, and let's see the 3rd movie. Let's see how it goes, right? But before we get to that, all right, the movie opened to 21.4 million in its opening weekend. I say this movie could probably open somewhere in the 15 to 20 million range, because I said this movie, the 3rd one's it's gonna open lower pretty much than the 2nd movie, and it kind of right there. with the 2nd movie, the second movie opened to 21.6 million. This one opened to 21.4 million. So a little drop. I expected a larger drop because the 2nd movie showed a decline, but this one held up, right? But let's see, reviews wise, I mean, it's not that well reviewed, about 40% on Rotten Tomatoes last I checked, right? And then A minus cinema score. So the people who saw this movie, the fans, liked it. But then again, can this movie expand beyond the fans? And that is the question. We saw that this movie this franchise was on the decline, right? But like I said, why we're seeing these sequels is because of how well it did overseas. Let's see how it did overseas. We don't have the numbers for overseas market yet. I guess it hasn't opened overseas yet. No, it has opened overseas, but we just haven't had the tally for it. But I guess it hasn't opened that wide yet. But the budget for this movie is only 40 million, which is pretty good. Like 21 million opening here. It's probably gonna end up somewhere in the 60 to 80 million range when it's sitting done domestically. I mean, which is still pretty good, right? I mean, but we don't know how fast it will decline, right? I mean, the opening weekend for this movie is pretty good, right? But we don't know if we're going to see a huge decline in the 2nd weekend, and it could close out in if it has a huge drop off, maybe in the 50 million range when it's sent done domestically. But they're probably doing an overseas play for this type of movie, so we'll see the 2nd weekend. But judging by Labor Day weekend coming up, we'll see. Tune in next week to see the update. All right, coming in number 2 is the R-rated comedy Good Boys. this movie surprised everyone. I say this movie could probably open somewhere in the 15 to 20 million range, and it opened a little bit better, opened to 21 million. In the second weekend, it didn't experience the huge drop off I was expecting, right? And that is a good thing, right? Its drop off is about 46% from its opening weekend, so has some good holds there. So in the second weekend, it pulled in 11.6 million, 41 million domestic so far, and overseas it pulled in about 7 million for a worldwide total of 49 million. But then again, comedies don't usually do well overseas because of the language barrier and all. So yeah, it's actually a pretty well-performing comedy for Universal. And Seth Rogen, he produced this movie as well, star in it as well. But the bulk of the screen time belongs to the teenage leads. The movie cost 20 million to make, 40 million domestic so far, so it's pretty much broke even, right? So I expect this movie to linger in theaters for some time. Alright, number 3 is one of the new releases last weekend, and that is Overcomer. It is about a coach for a high school cross-country track team, except that team is just only one person, a girl who has, I believe, asthma. So he has challenges to overcome, and the athlete herself has challenges to overcome, and they, I guess, bonded through their struggles to, I guess, achieve their respective goals, right? This is a movie that I say could probably open to about somewhere in the 5 to 8 million range, because hey, it is a feel-good movie. It is a faith-based film. It's probably based on a a real life story, and it's from the people who brought us War Room. Like I say, faith-based film, and War Room did really well. So if it appeals to the same demographic, I say it could perform pretty good, and it did, right? It opened to around 8.1 million, which is just right there, at the higher end of my estimate. I mean, reviews wise, it's not actually that great. I mean, 38% on Rotten Tomatoes last I checked, right? But it has an A+ cinema score, so the people who are the target audience liked it, loved it, A+, which is actually pretty good, right? The top score you can get, I believe, on a cinema score. But professional critics, I mean, they've seen these faith-based films before. They're usually, by the numbers, etc., right? So that's why we see the low tomato meter score for Overcomer. But like I say, for the target audience, it's performing as it should. The budget for Overcomer is not that high, about 5 million, so it's actually doing pretty well in its opening weekend. Let's see if it can sustain the momentum in its opening weekend and expand beyond their target audience. Alright, number 4 is the Fast and Furious spin-off, Hobbs Shaw. In this fourth weekend, it pulled in about 8 million. Drop off is about 43% from the previous weekend, and domestic so far is 147 million. And let's see how it did worldwide. Worldwide, it is doing awesome. Pulled in 440 million overseas for a worldwide total of 588 million worldwide. Alright, number 5 is The Lion King. It pulled in about 8 million, just a bit lower than Hobbs Shaw, but still about 8 million in the 6th weekend. Domestic gross is 510 million. That's domestic take, right? Let's see how it did overseas. Overseas, it pulled in 1 billion for a worldwide total of 1.5 billion. So, there you go. Another successful remake for The Lion King. I mean, despite all the criticism about Disney, going with the more lifelike look for this latest Lion King, it's actually performing, very well globally. Okay, number 6 is the other new releases last weekend. It is the dark comedy Ready or Not, about a woman who's married into a family who's trying to kill her, right? If she survives the night by playing this hide-and-seek game, then she is welcome into the family. Oh, at least that's what the trailer, suggests, right? This movie pulled in 8 million in its opening weekend, still lower than The Lion King and Fast and Furious, details, but lower. This is a movie that I say could probably open to somewhere between 5 to 10 million, because dark comedies usually are kind of like a hard sell at the box office, and it did a bit better than I actually thought. I mean, I was expecting, the box office to be lower, but it's actually within my range. So, perform, I guess within expectation. Reviews wise, it's actually pretty good, well reviewed, 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, but a B plus cinema score, so average score there. We'll see how it did in the second weekend. Alright, number 7 is the Angry Birds movie 2. This movie pulled in 6.4 million in the second weekend. Drop off is about 38%. I mean, the movie didn't open well. This movie was opened on a Tuesday, I believe, and then for like 6 days, the 6 day that it was open, I thought it could probably pull in about 30 to 40 million because of the previous movie's performance. For 3 days, I thought it would pull in 20 to 25, right, for first opening weekend, but it actually, like, for the 3-day weekend, it pulled in about 10.5 million, and for 6 days 16.2 million. So it's just like the brand for Angry Bird movie is no longer there, right? The first movie, I guess, surprised everybody. Everyone thought the movie, since it's based on a mobile game, and they made a movie out of it, and everyone's like, oh, this movie is gonna perform poorly because that game is passe, right? But it actually opened very well, right? It opened to 38 million, went on to make 107 million domestically and 352 million worldwide. So, and then they decided to, hey, let's make a sequel, because it's good enough to make a sequel, right? The box office performance of the first movie, and then they made the sequel, and I guess the demand is not that high for an Angry Birds 2 movie, although I thought the trailer was funny. But again, like the appetite for a sequel is not that high, as evidenced by the opening figure and the second weekend. So after 2 weekends, it only pulled in 27 million, and overseas, it pulled in 47 million for a worldwide total of 74 million. The budget is about 65, so it's gonna break even, but how much money it's gonna make at theatrically remains to be seen. But as you can see from the gross domestically and overseas, I guess the demand is not that high. So we probably won't see an Angry Birds 3, for example, unless it did really well, on home video. Alright, number 8 is Scary Movies to Tell in the Dark. This is based on a book, and it's doing actually pretty well, right? In this third weekend, it put in about 5.9 million, a drop off of about 42% or 41% from the previous weekend. Domestic gross so far is about 50 million, and let's see, overseas it put in 21 million for a worldwide total of about 72 million, and the budget for this movie is only 25 million. So relatively cheap horror movie to make, and the return is actually decent. Alright, number 9 is Dora and the Lost City of Gold. This movie pulled in 5.8 million over the weekend. That's its third weekend, drop off about 38% from the previous week. Domestic gross is about 43 million. And let's see how it did overseas. Overseas, it pulled in 17 million for a worldwide total of about 60 million. This movie cost about 50 million to make, unless it can have a rally overseas. I don't think it has opened that wide overseas yet, and I'm not sure how well received the Dora brand is overseas, or how recognized Dora is overseas. But judging by the opening figures, with the movie, with the territories polled so far, I don't think this movie is gonna be huge overseas, unless it pulled in huge numbers in, for example, China, like Warcraft, right? They pulled in huge numbers in China. But yeah, I mean, it's actually doing okay, right? Budget 50 million, worldwide so far 60 million. When it's all said and done, Dora is probably going to close out at about maybe 65 to 70 million domestically, which is pretty decent, for a movie that costs about 50 million to make, right? And it's going to make that number, the rest of the number up from overseas. Alright, closing out the top 10 is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the latest Tarantino movie. I pulled in about 5 million in its fifth weekend drop off. It's about 35%, it's a pretty decent drop off, right? Domestic so far is 123 million, and let's see how it did overseas. They pulled in 116 million for a worldwide total of 239 million, so almost 240 million. The budget's about 90 million, so it's actually doing pretty well. I think box office wise, the overseas market is still untapped because based on previous Tarantino movies. Overseas are pretty welcoming of his movies. All right, so that's it for the top 10. Let's move on to the new releases. I think we're gonna have only one big one this Labor Day weekend, and that is the supernatural thriller starring David Oyelowo, Storm Reed. And then I think there is, of note is the Indian movie Saaho. It's an action thriller in the vein of like the Fast and Furious movies, James Bond. There's everything thrown together if you know anything about Indian movies, right? And Bennett's War as well in theaters. Let's go with Don't Let Go, the supernatural thriller starring David Oyelowo, right? I believe that's how you pronounce it. So Oyelowo stars as a cop who I think is has a good relationship with his niece, played by Storm Reed. They constantly talk to each other through the phone, and one day he came to her home, right? Based on a phone call, something happened to her. He went to the home and discovered that she and her parents were killed, and probably during a murder robbery or so, right? And he was distraught. But then one day he received a phone call from his niece. And it turns out that there's like a time difference, right? She was calling from the past, and he was informing her that a murder is going to take place. You're gonna die. Your parents are gonna die, and they try to solve the murder mystery together through their phone conversation. But it sounds interesting. I thought it was interesting, right? Based on the premise. But then again, we're in the Labor Day weekend. This movie is released, like Labor Day weekend is not, I think, a large movie going experience for, families or people, so that's why it's kind of like a slow weekend for movies. But still, like, I think this movie has potential. I think for like a 3-day opening, it's gonna be probably somewhere in the 10 million ish range or so, right? For 4 days, maybe 15 million or 20. I could see it opening higher, maybe 20 million, but let's do conservative 10 million for 3 days and 15 million for 4 days. Of course, of note is Saaho. I don't know why this movie is going to be released, but based on previous Indian movies, it's probably going to pull in 2 to 3 million at the box office, because there is a market for Indian movies, and this one looks like it's like I said, you've seen the trailer, is huge, it's bombastic, action packed. It's like like a Fast and Furious movie, pretty much, with cars, chases, fights, explosions, like all these James Bond thing going on as well. So wouldn't be surprised to see it pop up in the top 10. This movie to pop up in the top 10, with like a 2 to 3 million opening. And then, of course, there's Bennett's War. It's a little drama. I guess it's probably based on a book as well. Judging by the name, I don't know how wide this movie is released, how many theaters this movie is going to be released in, but it might or might not pop up in the top 10. But I think I could probably pull in about 1 million, over Labor Day weekend. All right, so that's it for this week's podcast. Tune in next week to see how I did. Until then, take care. Bye bye.